I will do my duty as president. I'll fulfill my oath, and I will honor the Constitution. On January 20th, we'll have a peaceful transfer of power here in America.
That was President Biden making the same promise Vice President Harris made yesterday, a conflict-free transition from one administration to the other. Nancy Cordes joins us from the White House to break that down for us. Nancy, what does that look like, and what did the president mean today?
Well, he essentially said, Major, that setbacks like this one for the party are unavoidable. They're going to happen from time to time, but that people need to pick themselves up and move on. Basically, trying to convince very depressed Democrats that this isn't forever, that they can try again in 4 years. It was a pretty brief speech. He didn't talk at all about any reasons that he thinks the party may have suffered the way that it did on Tuesday night. He said that he had invited President Trump to the White House, that he was going to assist in any way he could with the transition. And he made a point, Major, of noting that, as ever, the election system was safe and secure. On Tuesday, he said he hoped that that would put to rest any notion out there on the right that somehow elections and election workers in this country have something wrong with them.
And as far as what remains of the Biden presidency, any clarity on either what the president will try to do during the lame duck session or any other business before he departs?
Yes, we do have some indications. The White House press secretary telling us today, Major, that he wants to work on getting as many of his judicial nominees confirmed, because obviously once President Trump takes over, he's going to be pushing a very different slate of nominees. He is also going to work to get more disaster relief for hurricane victims passed in the next couple of months, and he will continue to surge aid to Ukraine, knowing that, again, President Trump has a very different view of that crisis than President Biden does.
Nancy Cordes at the White House for us. As always, thank you very much.
You're
Peggy
welcome.
Collins and Deepa Shivram join us now. Peggy is Bloomberg's Washington bureau chief. Deepa is White House correspondent for NPR. So, Peggy, I want to start with you. Your takeaways of the election briefly, and that we have a peaceful transfer of power as we used to have, except for 4 years ago.
Well, starting with the last one there, I will say that the peaceful transfer of power and democracy holding is important for the country and certainly for both parties. In terms of the election takeaways, I would say one of the things we're covering most is the impact of inflation. The inflation we saw after COVID was the highest in 40 years that Americans had seen. Some had never seen it in their lifetimes. And we're hearing time and time again, as we did on the campaign trail, that the economy was the #1 issue, and particularly because people saw every day prices on household goods like food, gas, energy bills really come to the forefront in terms of what mattered when they went to the polls.
And Deepa, when I traveled the country, people who were concerned about this would give me tabulated differences in the price of certain consumer goods. They would also mention rent or mortgage payments with interest rates or insurance.
Yeah.
It wasn't just at the grocery store. It was across their entire pocketbook, if you will.
Childcare, a big one.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, I started hearing this, way before we even started talking about the 2024 election, certainly way before Kamala Harris became the nominee, right? This was like a even pre-midterms, I would say, question. I was traveling to Nevada a lot, covering voters there, and I would hear about all of the things that you mentioned. And at the same time, in like the second sentence, voters would be like, and things were better when Donald Trump was president, right? He wrote me a check. Like, these were things that it has been years of voters saying this. Got me a stimmy. And I think at this point, as Democrats sort of do this postmortem and try to figure out how they lost this election, there's so many things to talk about. But the fact that this was very known information, the fact that this was something that voters have been saying for a long, long, long time now, and still the messaging on the economy did not ever course correct in a way that was effective enough, I think is a very, very strong point to make.
Peggy, I'd like you to evaluate this one thing. I think the Harris campaign made a calculation that they were going to try to soften the economic damage by talking about housing, shifting people's focus, if they could, from inflation and their concerns therein to, hey, I'm going to deal with housing, and that's going to help you on a lot of these metrics. Didn't really work.
Well, you're
It's
right.
a real problem, and it's going to have to be addressed one way or the other, but it didn't really resonate.
Well, you're right. That's one of the things she was most specific about on the campaign trail in terms of her proposals, but that it isn't one that really resonated as much as they thought that it might. In terms of Americans really feeling like if they want to be in the middle class, that's part of the American dream, right, is to own a home and be able to do that. But it didn't resonate enough in terms of what we are seeing in terms of voters really wanting to feel better about their overall economic picture. I will mention also that the other big issue on the campaign trail was border security,
Absolutely.
which we heard time and time again in terms of the flood of migrants, not only over the southern border, but then migrants that were bused to cities like Chicago and New York. And we saw Trump gain inroads in cities in America, including in New York.
Deepa, evaluate that, because that did bring the issue home to places where it had not been brought home before. And when you see campaign advertisements where people complain about illegals, they're here without documentation, but that's the phraseology used in the campaign ads, getting free stuff, meaning they were being put up in hotels. There were other services being provided just to deal with their immediate humanitarian needs. People reacted negatively to that.
I mean, I think it's a border message and an immigration message that also comes back to the economy, like we were just talking about, right? All roads lead to the economy. And the thing about both the messaging on economy from Democrats and on the border was that it was constantly playing defense. Right? You ask Democrats, oh, what are you going to do on immigration? And it was, well, Donald Trump tanked the border bill. It took them a really long time on even the economic messaging for Kamala Harris to start talking about price gouging and going after price gouging. But that was way, way, way later in the game. And so it was constantly this message of pointing back at the other guy, right? Looking at Donald Trump, looking at Republicans. And so I talked to, a number of Democrats, obviously, in the last 48 hours, as I'm sure we all have, trying to analyze what's going on here. And many of them, have said, one, this was an election that was not just based off the last 100 days, right? This was a referendum on 4 years of a Biden presidency and how voters are feeling about that. And two, it was like on immigration specifically, they really are looking to Democrats to come up with a better answer than just, well, Republicans haven't done anything either.
Peggy, one of the things that the vice president also said is she would go after price gouging. Bloomberg pays a considerable amount of attention to underlying economic data and the movement of prices. Is price gouging a legitimate part of the inflation equation, or was that just a talking point?
Well, I think it was a talking point, but a complicated one to really convince the American people that she was going to be able to change the dynamics there. I think the prices that people saw rise were real, but they didn't really, I think, absorb her message as, oh, I'm going to be able to see prices lower quickly because she's going to stop companies from raising their prices. And I think that's where the difference was.
Was there evidence, is there evidence of corporations obtaining profits through artificially high inflated prices, meaning the prices went up because of supply chain issues and they just kept them there?
Well, I think what our reporting showed was companies were feeling the hit from supply chain, but that they were actually trying to compensate for, in most cases, for those additional costs, as opposed to potentially just milk the consumer. So I think that's, again, the area that was a bit complicated for American consumers to see how it would fix the problem quickly.
Peggy Collins and Deepa Shivram, thank you so very much for your time. Appreciate it.